We've talked a lot on the channel about abortion rights. There was a story a while back about a bill from Iowa that almost passed. It got tabled eventually, so it's in limbo, so to speak. It's not a dead bill, but neither is it of immediate interest. But there is a trend of anti women's rights bills being put up all over the country. Texas, did a bottle rocket just go off in the sounded anyway? Texas had a bill that wanted to use the death penalty in against women who had abortions. And now there is this new issue coming out of Wisconsin. This proposal by Patrick Testin and Barbara Dittrich is seeking support from colleagues for a bill that would prevent abortion from being performed solely because of race, color, national origin, ancestry, sex, or fetal anomaly like Down syndrome. So I want to read a few things to you, and then I want to talk about this bill, and then I want to discuss it in the context of the larger discussion and indeed assault, I would say, that's going on against abortion rights that's going across the nation right now. So this is Patrick Testin. This legislation is an essential step to solidify in statute that all unborn lives are to be treated equally. Deciding who is deserving of being brought into this world, into the world, based on their inherited characteristics is pure discrimination, to say the least. It's worth noting that Kentucky also has already passed a similar bill, and they're being sued by the ACLU. So the Civil Liberties Union is already stepping up and calling this out. I want to throw up another couple quotes here. This is from Wisconsin Public Radio. The proposal would allow a pregnant woman, her partner, or her parents to file a civil suit against a doctor who performs or attempts an abortion on a patient they know is having the procedure for discriminatory reasons. Additionally, it would require the medical examining board, to investigate any physician who violates provisions in the bill. And then the only major response that I have seen was from a Democrat from the same state, Chris Taylor, noting that in this case it seems as though the Republicans want to make abortion illegal in every circumstance and will stop at nothing in attempting to do so. And so that's a lot to go over. I want to start with the concept of sort of selecting characteristics for birth. And this is an issue that, full disclosure, I have some limited knowledge on this topic. I did a great deal of my graduate work was with a professor who wrote a book that touches on some of these topics, who was very interested in the post-human, in issues of where medicine meets philosophy, meets literature, these types of issues. And so in that realm, there is a debate being had about whether or not it's going to be a good thing as we become more and more proficient at genetically modifying embryos and changing the way that our children will be born, selecting for better muscle structure, hair color, eye color. And indeed, as this bill seeks to make illegal, the ability to either terminate pregnancies or outright get rid of things that we sometimes classify as disease, like Down syndrome. And academically, there is a large body of work specifically on disability studies and whether or not it's a good thing to even view something like Down syndrome as a negative characteristic or something that should be selected out of if one has the option. So before we talk about the issues surrounding this bill, I want to make it clear that I don't take a very strong stance on this issue. I've written a few papers at the graduate level on this topic and about human nature. But I'm empathetic to the fear that selecting very specifically for traits that we think are either going to, benefit the child monetarily or otherwise, selecting for, do you want a child that has blonde hair, blue eyes, and is particularly white, and isn't too tall, isn't too short, doesn't have any of these conditions, doesn't have any genes that might, you want to make sure that they don't even have the likelihood of getting certain diseases later in life, so on and so forth. There's lots of good that can happen, and there's lots of bad, and I understand that. I've engaged with that very deeply. And so now, having said that, I want to move into a discussion of this bill in particular as it relates to women's rights. So the first question I have for you, Mike, is do you see this as just another bill that is trying to set up legislators for moves to make abortion illegal across the board and to further this idea that personhood begins at conception, or as is becoming popular, at 6 weeks when the first heartbeat is detected? Do you think this is just a continuation of that issue, or is this a slightly different issue where they're trying to control for a particular type of bad faith discrimination?
My first thought would be, if I live in Wisconsin and I know that this law has passed, I'm not going to go into the abortion clinic and be like, yeah, I want to kill this baby because it's this race or because it has this problem. I don't know how you would verify a person's intent for their abortion. So it seems like a law that would be hard to have be practical, if for no other reason than like we're talking about you're making certain intentions illegal, which even that is a little dubious as far as I'm concerned. Is it another step in the what I guess we could phrase the anti-feminist abortion laws? Perhaps, yeah. I mean, I could see how it could contribute to that. I could also see an argument for it's well intentioned. It's meant to protect certain people. It's meant to stop the abuse of a certain system.
Okay.
But I do think it could also be turned the other way, and that same system could be abused. So, and I'm not as well read on this as it seems you are, aside from the fact that science fiction, which has always been my specialty, there's all kinds of utopian literature and things where there's this talk of genetic, purity and so on, or selecting for certain traits and that sort of thing. So, I mean, it's a thing that's well covered in science fiction. Mm-hmm. But as for this specific law, like, yeah, I don't know. I am dubious. Like, it smells of evil.
Well, I mean, to me, it seems pretty overt when we go back to this Patrick Teston quote. This legislation is an essential step to solidify in statute that all unborn lives are to be treated equally. And so from there, all you have to do is continue to reshape our collective cultural definition of what unborn personhood means, and it becomes easier and easier to make the argument that you're not having a discussion about abortion because abortion is only something that you can do when it's not a person yet. And the closer that they can get to an accepted definition of personhood at conception, the narrower and narrower and narrower they can make a woman's choice. And to me, it seems as close to black and white as you get.
Would it be different though if the phrasing was, you can't terminate a pregnancy on the basis of race, color, or creed?
No, I think the woman should be able to make that decision based on absolutely any criteria that she deems necessary. I think she has. Every woman should have and ought to have absolute sovereignty over their body. And so I oppose this bill. For me, it's pretty clear cut. It's a trend that's going around the country. More and more states have conservatives that are renewing their dastardly efforts to marginalize women. Why? Because when you empower women, when you give them their reproductive rights, when you give them education and when you allow them to participate in the political sphere and in the cultural discourse as equals, they start to undermine the patriarchal structures of power that have existed for millennia, and they constitute a threat to conservative ideology because women almost always in polling data tend to skew liberal. And so it is to the detriment of conservative ideology and conservative parties in general to empower women. And so any bill like this, when you have a congressman coming out and saying that its goal is to solidify in statute that all unborn lives are to be treated equally, this is a bad faith moral grandstand on the issue of unborn personhood, because the real motive of this bill is to create precedents upon which other legislators or indeed Patrick Testin himself later on can then use these precedents to write even more strict and harsh laws that undermine the reproductive rights of women and inherently damage the progress that has been made towards their liberty.